You heard about the ice cream social we had last week, 10 days ago now, I guess, at SMA. All the parents and the kids, a couple nights before school started, came in, and it was so joyful. They brought all their school supplies. We had ice cream donated by the family that owns Angie's Ice Cream as part of New Way Lunch. And Stewart's also donated ice cream. We raffled the car, and then the Matson family, which won the car, donated it right back to the school. It was just incredible. It was such a good night. But there was a point where I heard a screaming cry. And I went around the corner, and there in front of the school on Church Street was a mom trying to console her little 3-year-old, brand new student to Noah's Ark, who had just fallen on both of her knees and skinned them. And they were a mess, the way children get when they skin their knees. And the mom just looked up at me and she said, "Do you have a Band-Aid?" Even on an ice cream party day, life can be painful. You just never know when you'll be going along and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you skin your knee, or worse. Obviously, there's things way worse than a scrape or a bruise. But those skinned knees just reminded me, man, why does that have to happen? Why do we have to be going along just fine and then have something like that mar the experience? There are a lot of Christian churches that preach what they call today the prosperity gospel. There's some in our town and there's some in every town. These churches teach that if you follow Christ, not only will you be saved, but you'll be happy and prosperous. Everything will go your way. God will bless you for your faithfulness. You won't have hard times. Things will be blessed. And if you have hard times, oftentimes the preaching at those churches says, well, that's on you. You must have done something to not earn God's favor. But the gospel we heard tonight says the opposite of that. Jesus says to his apostles, I need you guys to know something about me. My path involves suffering. I can't be who I am without suffering. And Peter, right after having had this shining moment where he said something great, said, no, Jesus, not you. You're not going to suffer. Not you. I just told you you're the Son of God, so you won't suffer. And Jesus loses it. Because he says to Peter, if you don't get this right, you're going to make it really hard for me to reach you. If you're wrong on this, your whole life is going to become much harder than it was supposed to be. When Oprah Winfrey had her show on TV, one of the questions she used to ask people that I liked the best was when she was interviewing somebody who was well known, she would ask them, what's the lesson in life that it took you the longest to learn? Can you relate to that question? Most of us have a thing that we're like, oh gosh, I had to get good and old before I knew that. I fell into that same pit over and over again. Well, we all know that experience, and because of this gospel, we actually know what took Peter the longest to learn. If Peter were being interviewed by Oprah, he would have to say, it took me so long to learn that this path means that you can't avoid suffering. It's a wonderful path, but it does not avoid suffering. And I wasted a lot of time thinking it could. The way we know that it took him a long time to learn this lesson is by what he did on Good Friday. On the very last day before Jesus' death, Peter, remember, was asked in the courtyard by that servant girl, wait a minute, you knew Jesus, didn't you? And it happened again. He goes, oh, I can't suffer. I don't want to. No, I didn't know him. I didn't know him, he said. Because Peter would not allow suffering to be a part of the path. It was the lesson it took him the longest to learn about being on this journey. Catholic churches always have Jesus visible on the cross. Catholic churches don't just have a cross, they always have a crucifix somewhere where you can actually look at Jesus suffering and struggling on Good Friday. And that's a really important thing. A lot of visitors to our churches don't always like that. They'll say, why do you guys do that? Why do you focus so much on something negative? But the reason is because it's important for us to see, I can't believe how far he would go to show love. I can't believe that could happen to God's child. Right now, we're in the midst of a project at school because over the years, a lot of the rooms might have lost their crucifix for one reason or another, and they were replaced with crosses that have Jesus risen from the dead smiling on them. And those are beautiful, but that's not the lesson we need the kids to learn. We need them to know that when you're suffering for a good cause, that doesn't mean you've done something wrong. That's part of the path. Churches that teach the prosperity gospel don't want to see this. But it's important. It's the true story of who Jesus is and what he did. It's important for us to realize the paradox that life becomes easier when we realize that it's hard. When we can accept that life is hard, somehow it becomes a little bit easier to bear. When we think that life is supposed to be a nice downhill stroll, then when it's going uphill, we think, oh my gosh, what's this? God must have abandoned me. But when we accept, no, life is hard. Life is a challenge. It's sometimes unfair and lonely and difficult. And sometimes we're treated badly and it's not fair at all. But what Jesus tells us is, if you want life to be a downhill stroll, you're going to lose the point. But if you accept that it's an uphill climb, you'll wind up appreciating life as it is. You'll accept life on life's terms. Our parents and grandparents learned with traditional Catholic spirituality that we should never waste the pain that we're going through. Because pain is inevitable, we have to make a decision not to waste it. And if you went to Catholic school, you heard the nuns tell you what to do with it. You're supposed to offer it up. Do you remember the idea of offering it up? That's just as valid now as ever. The idea is that if you can face with nobility the terrible things that happen in life, if you do that nobly and bravely, you can actually forward that love and nobility to someone else, almost like an email. You can forward it like an email spiritually to someone else. That's what it means. It means that, for example, there's a couple in our parish who lost their 31-year-old son a year ago. And they were devastated. And they just passed the 1-year anniversary, and it's still as hard as day one. So this fall, when the day before school started, and the new kindergarten teacher we hired told us that she was quitting the day before school started, and I went, I thought, offer it up. I thought of them. I thought, however much stress and sorrow I'm going through right now, whatever that feeling is, it's nothing compared to them. So I'm going to try to face this nobly, and I'm going to forward it to them spiritually like an email so that they can have some of that comfort, that peace. It's a very mystical idea that you can forward your noble suffering to someone else, but all of us know that we gain strength from watching other people handle hard things with grace. And when we do that, we can make other people's burdens just a little lighter. a little easier to hold. So maybe it's good for us this week to check in with this topic Jesus is giving us to think about. How do I handle the pain in my life? When I face something that's really hard or sad or unfair, do I use it for a creative purpose? Do I think of that pain as something I can use so that I don't waste it? Who is someone in your life that you're most worried about right now? They just lost a spouse, or they just got a terrible diagnosis from the doctor, or they're going through a horrible depression, or whatever it is. Is there a way you could offer your struggles as a way to help them, whether they know it or not? Could you package that up and offer it to them as a spiritual gift? That poor little 3-year-old girl came to school that night to meet her teacher and to have some ice cream, and she left with 2 bandaged little knees. And that shouldn't have happened. At least it seems that way. But let's not make it worse than it already is by saying that. It did happen. That happens in life. We know that. Life is hard. So let's be willing to offer it up and never waste a drop of what comes our way.